sought to challenge a law, which is not a right or a relief in persona. The relief is not personal to the River State government, because what they sought to do is to challenge the relief in persona. Let me just tell you what they did. What they were saying is that if you check the exclusive list, right? Taxation of companies' profits and control gains. Oh, yeah, that's it. Taxation of incomes, profits, and capital gains. That is what the Constitution allows them to collect tax on. Right. What the River State government, and which the court agreed with them, is that they're not allowed to collect other things. Example, your VAT, withholding tax, education tax, technology tax, etc. So any law that has given, which the federal government has made, allowing them to collect those taxes that I just listed, is null and void. So my point is this: the judgment, even though was granted by the Attorney General, was granted in favor of the River State government, it's not a law that was, or it's not a judgment that was granted to them personally. It is granted against laws and in tangent with the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is why when this judgment was delivered, the states government, they started to, enact their own laws, allowing them to collect those VAT and those other laws that I just mentioned. Now, what I know is that generally, so when you're asking, when the court grants a judgment, you are supposed to ask the court of first instance, that's the Federal High Court or the State High Court, as is where, to say, grant me stay of execution. If that court refuses, then you go to the Court of Appeal. Of course, in this instance, the River State government, the federal government and the FIRS, they asked for a stay of execution, but they were denied. And they have now gone to the Court of Appeal. As a lawyer, I have to be very careful what I say, because I have not read the order of the Court of Appeal, but I'm just going to be stating my facts based on what I have seen in the news. The first thing is this: generally, in practice, if I get a judgment in the Federal High Court or the State High Court, my next recourse is to the Court of Appeal of that same court, right? Even though the Court of Appeal is one, so nothing says I cannot go to Court of Appeal in another state, for example. But for convenience, the files of the lower court are in Lagos State. There's a reason why? Because obviously there are laws that determine which court of first instance you should go, right? So I start everything in Lagos State. I have no business going to Abuja to go and seek relief at the Court of Appeal. What I notice in this, based on what I have read, is that the panel that granted this stay of execution was in Abuja. For me, I call that forum shopping. I think there's something I don't want to be too blatant, right? But I can imagine what could have gone down if a high court, a federal high court in River State gives a judgment, and then a Court of Appeal in Abuja now orders stay of execution of that judgment. That's the first thing. The second thing for me is that I am aware that the Court of Appeal is on vacation. And this is not to say that they cannot constitute a panel for whatever reason during court vacations. But the Court of Appeal is on vacation. I don't know. Yes, maybe you can see that there's an urgency in this matter, because the states or the state governments are, enacting their own law. So maybe that's the urgency. But for me, I think there's something sinister here. Am I surprised? My answer would be no, because I remember when this thing came out, somebody said that the state's government enacting their own laws might be premature. And I sort of thought about it, because I know the kind of government that or the kind of country we are, because it's as simple as ABC. And that was why when I started, I took time to say why the Federal High Court arrived at that constitution and arrived at the decision based on what is in the constitution. Does the constitution allow you to collect VAT? Yes or no? It just takes you having to read through the constitution that gives you the powers to see whether or not it's there. Right? It seems as simple as ABC, but we all know that there's a bit more to this than what we actually see. So that's just me explaining the background and how we have gotten here. I think I'm done speaking unless anybody has a question they want to ask me.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Tolani. That was a beautiful position. And so we'll take D, then we'll throw the floor open for contributions and questions. D, are you there?
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So, good morning, good afternoon.
D, I'm sorry, before you go, I also need to say something. Sorry. I think I also read, I forgot, I sincerely apologize. I think I read that the stay of execution was also ordered against Lagos State government. That's, in my mind, is not binding Lagos State, and which is why I explained at the beginning that, you know, the law, a judgment given is only binding against you. So if what Lagos State can do is seek to join that appeal, because obviously one way or the other the law also affects them. If the court has not made an order to join Lagos State or any other state, the Court of Appeal does not have powers to make any law in that judgment against them. But I don't know. What I read is that the judgment or the stay of execution was also granted against Lagos State government. I think that is also very wrong. Thank you.
All right, thank you. D, go ahead. D, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, House. It's a very interesting conversation, right? Trying to clarify why this revenue is so important in terms of resource control for the states. But more importantly, we have to understand basically how states' budgets are funded, right? I think it's very important that we have a little bit of clarity on that. Then I also think that it's also important to understand why, what are the different revenue streams that the FRS takes on behalf of the federal government, on behalf of everybody, and then, how this money is now shared in terms of how it's distributed to the respective, should I say, states. And then also to also discuss about the importance or the connection between the internally generated revenue of the states and the federal allocation, and also to understand why states clamor for more of their own resources. So, as much as possible. Hello?
Can you walk us back 2 minutes?
Okay, I'm switching from, I'm switching. All right, so like I said, the most important thing is to understand why states are clamoring for more of their resource control, especially with regards to the federal allocation and how it is being received and how it is being disbursed. So the conversation is going to really center around that. I think first off is for us to understand the two main revenue streams for every state. So the two main revenue streams are your internally generated revenue and your federal allocation. Now, internally generated revenue is not to be submitted to the federal government, but to be declared. So what happens, again, is that every single state generates some IGR. That revenue is for your state to run. The one from the federal government are federal revenues. Olabode, can I take a 1 minute recess? I just want to fix up something at the background.
All right. Little madam wants to speak. She wants to add a case. Nigeria she probably is already dealing with the data, so I don't blame her for wanting to contribute. Okay. Who said that? We're on live stream, guys. Please. So yes, guys, like for you guys who are used to Knights and Cardinals, you are probably not shocked by the level of engagement we do have. Yes, some people have started shifting the goalpost. They started by, oh, where's your data? We provide the data, we provide the legal analysis, we provide the historical consideration. Now they're like, oh, they're doing it without understanding the nuances. We know data is just nothing in itself except to understand the nuances. Yeah. The next goalpost to shift, we'll still meet you there. You know how we do it. So, regardless of your goalpost, those who stand by their facts and truth and the truth actually do not have anything to lose. But please, no interjections in this conversation. I beg of you. It is a conversation that has been live streamed, and it is not nice for us to have interjections. I don't know if this is back so that I can take it away from me.
Yeah. Can I continue?
Yeah. Please go.
Thank you very much. So, like I said, every state has two main revenue sources. So one is called your IGR, which is your internally generated revenue. I'll say revenue stream called federal allocation. Now, federal allocation is a combination of all revenue received by the federal government on behalf of the country, and it is distributed across all the states based on a revenue sharing formula. So, I think the first thing we need to discuss about is the IGI itself. Now, the IGI itself historically has been something like a pride for governors because they know within themselves that is the best determinant of their internal economy. With your IGI infrastructure, civil service reforms, you can do so many things that you traditionally cannot do. Everything, the IGL funds is basically internal. Now, the external revenue, which is the federal allocation, is a function of the federal government's ability to, should I say, receive revenue on behalf of the federating units. And this is usually, there are several revenue streams, right? But we'll just talk about two of the most popular ones. So the first one is the FIRS, which is the Federal Inland Revenue Services. Basically, it takes all the taxes from all the two tax streams, right? Now, there's the petroleum profit tax, which is the most popular one, and then there's the non-oil taxes. So last year, the federal government, I'm going to read the figures now for 2020. The federal government set a budget of 5 trillion for 2020 and received 4.9 trillion. So that's almost a 92 to 93% budget completion in terms of what they set out to receive and what they actually received on behalf of all the units. What is also interesting to note is that petroleum profit tax actually constituted about 30% of that revenue, or 1.5 trillion, and then non-petroleum profit tax constituted 3 trillion. So I think with that, you can see clearly the impact of non-petroleum tax and non-oil tax. Now, out of the non-oil tax, there are three main revenue streams. So one is called company income tax. The other is called gas income and capital gains tax and stamp duties. They all come together, and then there's the very famous VAT. So VAT is divided into two. There's one called non-import VAT, and there's one called NCS VAT. So basically, the VAT revenue is the one that came under contention with Rivers State, right? Typically under the federalism or the federal performance of the country. What happened was that many years ago, 1998, 1997, historically, a lot of the federating unit and the states did not have the structure to be able to allow them to be able to mine VAT correctly. So they had this gentleman agreement with the federal government to say you can take the VAT on behalf of all the states and then you can reallocate it back to each state based on what they got. So the money from VAT is essentially not supposed to be shared according to the sharing formula. The money from VAT is supposed to be returned back to the federating states based on what they were able to achieve. So, for instance, if your region if your region achieved a higher tax collection, then you're able to benefit from it. However, if your region...
Okay, I think it takes some time. and then come back. Yeah, I think for now, let's wait for D to sort things out and then come back. Okay, so let me give a quick summary for those who have not followed the news. I think a lot of people have followed it, but just for the benefit of those who are on YouTube or watching, listening online, is that I'm just going to talk about the news that we've heard so far, because I know D is going into depth on how the revenue is shared and collected and all that. So this week we heard that Lagos River State government, has basically has been able to get the powers to collect their own VAT. And following that, we heard some states were not too happy about it, and I think one state actually said that be your brother's keeper. That's something that we heard. It seems like a lot of states are not happy, or some states are not happy with what happened, but also other states are happy, or the people in those states has also signed into law. The Lagos State Assembly signed into law the ability for them to collect VAT, and then the governor today signed it into law that that was basically put his pen against it, agreeing and accepting that would go ahead. And now we're hearing another news saying that the Court of Appeal orders a stay of execution. I think Tolani was explaining what that stay of execution means. I think so. One of the conversation is to understand, is that stay of execution valid? Is that going to go ahead? Many people in the conversations we've had on Clubhouse this week, some people have been quite happy with the news, saying that this is a great way for the states to begin to look inwards and to be able to generate their funds. Some people are saying, okay, what are other states who may be impacted by this decision? What are they going to do? How are they going to be able to survive? As we know, Lagos State generates a lot of money in terms of VAT, and their IGR is quite high. River State, I think, is the next, and I believe FCT is the third. I'm not sure, but I know D is going to give that information. But there are other states that are not getting as much, or not generating as much VAT. So if the states that are generating are going to keep their VAT, there's that question as to what would the other states do. But also people are saying, well, that's an opportunity for those states to be able to look at how they can generate funds, make sure that their state is viable, they can pay salaries, they can do all the things that they need to do without depending on the states who the states that are generating a lot more VAT. So I think that gives a summary as to where we are. Today we're hearing this latest news, which is the Court of Appeal putting a stay of execution order. So Labode, just to give that summary, and then let's see if D is ready.
All right, thank you very much. D, are you there? Okay, I'm guessing D is is busy at the moment. Let's just take one or two Okay, Ogbona is here. Ogbona is a legal practitioner too. So Ogbona, please, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
All right, thank you, everybody. This news came as a great surprise to me, because I was aware that the lower court, that's the Federal High Court, had refused the federal government or FIRS's application for stay of execution. I was wondering why the FIRS won't file a stay of execution, because the final orders of the court that were made are declaratory in nature. Now, what the court did was just to interpret the provisions of the Constitution. So it was the wrong application that was filed. What the FIRS was supposed to file at the lower court was supposed to be an injunction pending appeal, and they filed a motion for stay. I'm sure that's why the court refused it, because you cannot stay declaratory reliefs. You can only stay monetary judgments. So I mean, they probably now filed the correct application at the Court of Appeal. But the problem is, I've not seen. I mean, I've been reading articles. I've not seen whether the application was granted motion ex parte or on notice. I do not think it was granted on notice. Motion ex parte, of course, is when you file an application without putting the other party on notice. You just, go before the court and inform the court that there is an irreparable injury that will be occasioned on you if that application is not granted. I do not know what the irreparable injury is though, but I do not know if it was granted on notice. Now I find it, and the court now granted a status quo antebellum. Status quo, first and foremost, means what the situation that exists at the moment. Antebellum now means the situation that existed before hostilities commenced. So what the court did was to revert to what the situation was before Rivers State instituted that action in court. I find that I'm not supposed to comment on proceedings that are pending before the court, but I think it's quite disturbing, though. I do not see why the court should grant even if there was a case to grant an injunction pending appeal. I would have thought that the court would have directed that the money be paid into an interest yielding account. So it's now whoever wins at the court of appeal will now have access to the money. So that's what we normally do. If you obtain a monetary judgment, or if a monetary judgment is entered in your favor at the lower court, and the other party is not willing to pay and seeks to appeal the judgment of the court, you can ask the court to make the stay of execution conditional. That means that the monies can be paid into an interest yielding account, open in the name of the deputy chief registrar of the court, pending termination of the account. But what the court has now done was to grant an injunction in favor of FIRS. So the situation that existed before Rivers State started the action was that FIRS was collecting these VAT. So FIRS continues to collect the VAT. So in the event that the Supreme Court now comes to a finding that the Court of Appeal at the first instance, then the Supreme Court now comes to a finding that it is Rivers State that is supposed to collect the VAT, what now happens to the monies that the federal government has been collecting from the time the judgment was delivered? So I would have thought that the court would have directed that, okay, look, nobody takes this money. The money should be paid into an interest yielding account. Direct maybe a neutral party. Court directs that a neutral party be collecting this VAT, paying it into an interest yielding account. Or is the court now going to direct at the end of the day? Well, Rivers State, the solicitors for Rivers State will know what to do. I mean, one of their orders, I would think that one of the orders they will seek before the Court of Appeal was for the FIRS to give an account of all monies that have been collected since judgment was entered. And it now becomes a judgment debt against the federal government. But when are you now going to get the money from the federal government? The process of enforcing judgments against the federal government is quite Herculean. I mean, it's quite Herculean. Anybody that understands the proceedings knows that it's quite Herculean. So, I, for one, I do not understand this order that was granted today. I just hope that the Rivers State, because what the court should have done was to have ordered accelerated hearing. So normally you have 3 months or 90 days, one of them, to lodge your appeal. Then you have 45 days to file your brief, 30 days for the respondent, 14 days for your reply. The court should have just granted accelerated hearing, And that's okay. No, rather than grant a motion for stay, why don't I abridge the time within which parties can file their brief? So within 1 or 2 months tops, what is the injury that the federal government will suffer? It has been collecting this VAT for over how many years? What is the injury that they will suffer if they don't collect this VAT for 2 months? So the court abridged the time. Rather than 45 days to file your brief, the court says, okay, file it within 10 days. Rivers State, file yours within 5 days. You reply within 3 days. We will hear the matter. Within 15, 20 days, we'll deliver the judgment. Now, you've now settled it. The rights of the parties have now been settled. And, they can now proceed from there. So I do not understand. This matter is now at the Court of Appeal. Will probably take another 6 months, 7, 8 months. I believe the Rivers State government will try to expedite the appeal, though. But then, how long will it take? It's a civil appeal, so it's not as if it's a criminal appeal where the rights of an individual are being infringed upon. So how long? Civil appeals take forever. It's not even a fast track appeal, too. So, I do not know how this matter will be decided eventually, but I do not think the order that the court granted today was granted. I do not see the justice in the order that was granted today. Thank you.
Thank you. So sorry, I had to jump in, Tolani. Can I continue now?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so like I was saying, the federal allocation is the real bone of contention because the factors of revenue that consist into the federal allocation, they are usually things that some elements of that should not be shared using the sharing formula, while some elements of that can now be shared using the sharing formula, right? Even that in itself has a lot of flaws because there are some states who contribute unfairly to this revenue, and there are some states that don't contribute fairly to the revenue. But that sharing formula is the part B of the question. The part A of the question is the VAT, which shouldn't have been shared using the revenue sharing. Now, what Wiki has done is to do calculations of the VAT that was accruable to his own state, and to say, look at the amount of VAT that is supposed to come back to us, and look at what the federal government is paying to us. So now the bone of contention is, if we are generating this much VAT that is not supposed to be shared, and you are sending it back to us every month, and it's lesser than what we had projected that we should receive on VAT, then that now becomes problematic. And to the degree that you have been helping us because we did not have the capacity to collect our own VAT, but now that we have the capacity to now collect our own VAT, then we will take our VAT and we would not require your assistance to collect VAT. Now, for the other taxes that are collected on behalf of all the federating units and then shared using the River State government and Lagos State government will be happy to allow the federal government continue to collect revenue, but then they'll share the revenue. Now, one of those ones that the state could not also share, could not also request to collect directly, would have been items that are taxable, like the petroleum profit tax. That one is very problematic because apart from the fact that so many things are going into it, like oil derivation and exploration, frontier exploration, and all the other resource control, like about 40% of it goes into the Niger Delta region and funds the NDDC and all of that. Another part of the tax that is not being talked about is company income tax, which a lot of people have different opinions as to how company income tax should be shared, because a lot of burden for the input and into company income tax in terms of all the key activities in terms of head office, warehouse and distribution, manufacturing that goes on happens in some certain states. But when it comes to sharing the revenue, it is assumed that because the profit of the product is sold across the entire country, then the revenue is accruable from all the states in the entire country, and so therefore the revenue should be shared back to all the states in the entire country. But then there have been serious arguments as to why certain activities that are very unlikely to have been profitable in certain regions should be shared in certain regions. A classic example would be tobacco products or alcohol products that are produced in certain regions and sold across certain regions, but not allowed to be sold in certain regions. So therefore, when, for example, Nigerian breweries declares a profit, including sale of alcohol, it will be questionable why such type of revenue should be shared across all regions. But that one is a bit complicated. But the consumption tax, which is VAT, is a bit simpler, to say the least, that the VAT is almost sold at point of consumption, which is per state, per local government, and it's at that by that very definition, it becomes easier to be able to aggregate the VAT that is being accounted in each state, and then to be able to replicate it back to the states that the VAT has come from. So now let us go back to the non-VAT taxes that are shared. Now, the revenue sharing formula, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it's 40, 30, 10, 10, 10. So it's 40, 30, 10, 10, 10. That's the revenue sharing formula. Now, if you look at the revenue sharing formula, 40% stands for equality. Now, that is to say that of every revenue that is received on behalf of all the federating units, 40%, which is like a base value, is shared equally amongst all the federating units. Now, this itself, it's a bit problematic to the degree that 40% is a huge chunk of the revenue to be shared across all the states, irrespective of whether or not these states contribute. So now let's also look at classic case of states and budgets. Lagos State, as at 2020, before they reviewed their budget, had the budget of 1 trillion, right? Rivers State had a budget of 550 billion. Rivers State had to review their budget down to, I think, 350 or 330, and Lagos State had to review their budget down to 830. But now let's talk about the entire revenue that came into Lagos State, for instance. Lagos State had a comprehensive revenue. Now, this revenue includes money received from the federal government of 116 billion and money received in the state, internally generated revenue of about 419 billion. So that together, put together, gives about 434 billion. Now, if you look at that to about 800 billion, there is a huge budget deficit that cannot be financed by the state, that has to be financed by external borrowing and so many other things. And that's all means that a lot of infrastructure projects that are planned for the state would not be given funding. Now, if you look at something like Rivers State actually had about 258 billion, which is the entire revenue in 2020. So 141 billion was given from the federal government, and about 117 billion was generated in the state. So combined, the two of them gave Rivers State about 258 billion or 259 billion. So the point I'm trying to make is to show you that despite the combination of this revenue, for somebody like Lagos State or for somebody like Rivers State, if they have, say, an excess of 50 billion that is stuck in the federating account that should have been appropriated to them correctly in the first place, it makes a huge difference in the ability to actually execute on their promises to the state indigents. So their promises to fix roads, their promises to fix bridges, to provide security for the state in terms of maybe soft security like surveillance, police trucks and all of that. The ability to provide clean water for states that generate water services for indigents in the state, and the ability to subsidize healthcare, provide medicine for hospitals, assist people with education, pay staff salaries for lecturers and things like that. So it's a very complicated process, and every billion actually accentuates the ability of the government to execute on its promise to the people. So every governor is a bit very aggressive about the total sum they get. Now, not just what they internally generate, which is their exogenous or internal, it's not something that anybody can affect, but their exogenous money, which is the money that has been taken to the federal government and is being shared back to them. So like I said, 40% of this money, or immediately the money comes, it is 40% is shared equally amongst everybody. So for example, Lagos Ports generates 1 trillion naira in 2020, and 40% of it is shared across all the 36 states. Whether or not the states have ports like Gombe, whether or not the states have any sort of economic activity that impacts. Don't forget that there are certain states that the impact of the ports is not severely heavy on them, right? But 40% of the money is shared across all and sundry. So those are the kind of sharing formulas that begin to exhibit a bit of unfairness, right? The next part of it that is shared, basis for sharing money, again, 30% of it is shared by population. So now, irrespective of your state's ability to even contribute to the federal coffers, so long as you have a population, whether the population is checked or unchecked. Now, we know that certain regions in this country have an unchecked population because of the religious practice that allows them to be able to have a bit of larger set families. So we have 1 man, 3 wives, and multiple, say, 16 to 12 children, and population continues to grow at a quadrupling rate, like it grows faster, right? So there are some other states, because of the prevalence of the religion practice in those states, or because of the exposure or the because of the impact of education in those states and the connection of childbirth, trying to, there are a lot of studies that link the higher educated you are, the less likely you are to have multiple children, because a lot of people consider education as a social security, right? So if you cannot educate them, you cannot guarantee they will have some level of social security in society, which means they will not have skills that they can transfer into jobs and transfer into earning, and then they will not be a burden on you. So therefore, you will not give birth to a certain number of children. So your population control is actually checked internally because of your education. Now we also understand that across the divide of this country, a certain region is more educated, open to Western education, and the other region is less exposed to Western education. So what implication means is that a certain region grows asymmetrically, and the other region grows in like a quadrupling effect. So one region grows in like a 1 + 1 = 2, but another region grows like 1 + 3 + 16. So these are the reasons why population disparities between, say, the north and the south actually creates a lot of imbalance and injustice when it comes to using population as a prerequisite for sharing revenue. Now, the next set is land mass. Again, 10% of the revenue is shared based on jurisprudence of land mass. Now, if you look at it, certain states like Lagos State are not blessed with a lot of land, right? But they actually do the us work in terms of, the baboon that does the work. While certain states are blessed with a plethora of land mass. You can remove like I think about 6 or 7 Lagos from Niger State, for instance, but Niger State has an
Sorry, Dave. So Niger State is actually bigger. Sorry, can you mute your mic for a minute?
Oh, I apologize. My screen is locked. Just a second. And
okay, so sorry. So Niger State, just to correct that, Niger State is over 20 times bigger than Lagos. I think it's over 76 square kilometers, while Lagos is just about 76,000 square kilometers. Sorry. While Lagos is just over 3,400 square kilometers. So just to put it into the right perspective.
Thank you very much. So Niger State is 20 times bigger than Lagos State, right? And that makes a lot of sense that, that to the degree that they are big, they have a lot of advantages. But if you now look at it in terms of what they've generated, Niger State generated in 2020 a revenue of about 11 billion. I think I'm calling the exact figure is 10 billion 524 million. So 10 billion. So let's say approximately 11 billion. Lagos State generated 419 billion. But I also think that is a very if you look at even a lot of ministries, parastatals and agencies like LASPAC, LASMA, the Lands, Ministry of Lands, they generated more revenue than the entire Niger State, despite having less land mass, despite having less, land mass. So then again, when you now talk about how these states, how the revenue is being shared, you now take a large chunk of that and you base it on land mass to share revenue. It becomes unfair. The next part is actually the part of this that should be the most important prerequisite for sharing funds, and that is revenue effort, and it is given a 10% weight. So this is like a 4-unit course on your CGPA that is getting a 1-unit credit, right? And the courses that are supposed to be getting a 1-unit credit are getting 4-unit credit. I don't know how I can explain it better than that, but for those that everybody at least understands how the university CGPA system works. There are 3-unit courses, 2-unit courses, and 1-unit.
So let me try. So this is like there's a for those who studied mechanical engineering. This is like thermodynamics being weighted 10 credit model, but then something like modeling or C++ being weighted 30 credit model. That's the best I can do. For the engineers, I think you can understand where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So basically, revenue actually accounts for 10%, and another 10% is shared by. Get this, and this is not a joke. This is actual fact. I put the PTR on my DP so you can see it. Rainfall, water supply, hospitals, and direct assessment. So what this tells us is that about 40% of the revenue is shared on things that are favorable to certain regions. When you look at population, when you look at land mass, when you look at things like rainfall, water supply, these are things that are exogenous bullshit that in my own economic analysis, it just are favorable to certain regions, but are clearly not favorable to other regions. When you also look at equality as a basis for sharing revenue, and you take as much as 40% and you share it across 36 states, it dissolves the, should I say, the energies that has been put into actually making your state a conducive environment for those revenues and productive activities to happen. So when you look at all of these scenarios, you can see clearly why, for example, Ogun State is very industrialized. They've created a lot of industrial parks. They are very intentional about creating quality roads, creating cheap access to C of O's for industries to start business, and creating industrial clusters, giving them tax rebate. And as a result, a lot of breweries, a lot of manufacturing plants are actually situated in that region. And they, by the sheer volume of what they do, right, they employ people who live in that region, who pay taxes. And these taxes are supposed to be inputted back into Ogun State in terms of providing hospitals, so that when the children of these people who are paying these taxes fall sick, they will have access to quality health care. They are supposed to be provided back into road and infrastructure, so that not just the road that leads to their offices, but the roads that lead to their homes are tarred, so that there will be less cases of things like accident leading to loss of life, leading to loss of their ability to contribute back to society. There will be less impact in terms of, repairs and maintenance of vehicles and all of that, because they are driving to work in bad roads. There will be less expenses on things like petrol, for instance, because they are being going to work faster through less hold up and back. So you can run these scenarios for how you can connect the dots between actually fixing, reinvesting social amenities as a government back into your society, and your ability to attract a productive population, both at an industrial scale to attract industries, but I think at a very basic scale to attract household consumption, and the I don't want to go too deep into the economic part of it, but that's essentially to say that if you do the work, you get the gain. If you don't do the work, you don't get the gain. So a lot of states are very intentional about doing the work so that they can get the gain, so that they can attract industries, attract factories, attract businesses, tech settlements, agricultural settlements, agricultural refining settlements, based on the what I call the comparative advantage that those states have. So, for example, the southwestern states can try and make their regions a bit industrialized because they don't have a great deal of industrial scale agriculture going on there. If you compare their land mass to what they're able to refine, to what they're able to produce based on their soil test, there are certain things that they will do better, and they will just focus on it. If you go to the middle belt, it's an agrarian society where a lot of the people are trained agriculturalists, and they're able to build large scale agri products, right? If you look at the same thing for like the south, the southeast, these areas that have been so forgotten, the southeast is a very heavy trading zone, but even the south should be somewhere that should be, I mean, you can see symptoms of brilliance with gas to power, and such things should actually be, it should not be treated as a symptom of society, but actually like a core export of that society. So what I'm trying to say is that all these gas deposits that are available in Bayelsa, that are available in Akwa Ibom, they shouldn't just be refined and exported to China for dollars. They should actually